I already know fans of the original Sinking City are going to be pissed about this game. I never played the original. It's been on my backlog for quite some time now, but I just never took the time to give it a playthrough. But I did do some research for the sake of this video, and man, did they betray the fans of the first game. The Sinking City 2 is in a completely different genre compared to the original. The original Sinking City was an open-world detective game with survival horror mechanics and a Lovecraftian backdrop. You'd explore the city and talk to NPCs while solving cases and managing different factions. The first game had clunky gameplay, but people were able to look past that for the sake of having a unique experience. Fans of the original wanted a sequel that would flesh out all these cool ideas, but instead they decided to cut everything original about the game and make a sequel that takes all of its ideas from modern Resident Evil. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I do enjoy the typical Resident Evil remake style of gameplay, but when you're a small company trying to mimic one of the biggest franchises on the planet, you end up just being the Temu version of a better product. The gameplay loop of Sinking City 2 includes everything you'd come to expect from a modern third-person linear survival horror game. You'll explore interconnected rooms, find important key items, unlock shortcuts, manage limited resources, etc., etc. This is definitely closer to Resident Evil 2 Remake than any of the other RE games. The only difference is how clunky everything feels here. Animations look jank, combat feels off, and the overall presentation has that typical Unreal Engine 5 shine to it. But let's start off with the combat. For most of the game, you'll be fighting an enemy called the Slither. They're these worms that crawl around on the floor and inhabit the dead bodies, turning them into zombie-like creatures. And you'll be fighting these guys 99% of the time. Part of me wants to complain that in a Lovecraftian setting, the best generic enemy they could come up with was a zombie. But at the same time, I can't really think of a Lovecraftian creature that could show up often enough to work as a basic enemy, so maybe I'll let this one slide. Still a bit lazy though. When you're not fighting the Slither, you'll also be avoiding a small jumper type enemy called the Stygian Harvesters. I have no idea if that's how you pronounce it. These little guys do a very telegraphed leap attack at you and will die to one stomp of the boot. They're not much of a threat, just something that forces you to stay moving while fighting other enemies. As far as enemy variety goes, that's more or less it. There's variations of the Slither that'll shoot projectiles or ones that soak up a bit more damage, but that's pretty much it. There's one enemy later that's introduced in the final stretch of the game called a Deep One, but he shows up only a handful of times, so he almost doesn't even count. Combat in general is very familiar if you have played any third-person horror game before, but they try to change it up a bit by adding a dodge and melee attack. Kinda reminds me a bit of the Silent Hill 2 remake. Melee attacks can be pretty useful if you're trying to save ammo. A neat part about this game is that enemies will react to where on the body you shoot them. If you shoot one in the leg, they'll drop to the floor, opening them up to a kick. I relied on this strategy quite a lot if I didn't like how quick a Slither was closing in on me. Punching enemies isn't usually worth it, they often just tank it and then get a free grab on you. It's more or less a last resort if you happen to run out of ammo and need to try something. Kinda like the knife in the earlier Resident Evil games, it's only there so you don't get hard locked by a lack of resources. The dodge mechanic, however, is where most of the jank with this game's combat comes from. You do have iframes on it, meaning you're invincible if you time it right, but this has to be the most inconsistent dodge of all time. There's times I felt like I timed it just right, but got hit, and other times I dodged into enemies but didn't take any damage. It also makes running past enemies the optimal playstyle, since half the time you can just mass the dodge to get past 2 to 3 enemies, maybe only taking a little bit of damage but saving all of your ammo. I think the dodge would have been better balanced if it was just a genuine tool to create distance quickly, instead of a way to iframe your way through enemies Dark Souls style. As for weapons, there's the typical selection of staples here. You'll have access to a handgun, a shotgun, rifle, machine gun, and eventually a grenade launcher. The game's pretty short, so you'll get access to new guns frequently. And I do have to mention, this game probably has the worst feeling shotgun I think I've ever experienced. This thing has no kick to it at all. Shotguns should make you jump in your seat when you use them just from how powerful they feel, but this thing is more of a pea shooter. I genuinely felt like the handgun did more damage and staggered enemies better if you hit the weak points. Now you can find attachments for each weapon in the environment by solving optional puzzles or unlocking special safes. The upgrades are somewhat negligible though, it's just slightly better accuracy, slightly better damage, things like that. There's also a small progression system that utilizes a special item called Dream Essence. Just like weapon attachments, you'll find Dream Essence in the environment. Once you collect enough, you can use them to unlock some passive buffs. These passive buffs, however, are almost pointless. They come in 4 tiers, and you need to unlock a few on the first tier to unlock the second, and so on and so forth. I explored every nook and cranny and still barely broke into tier 3 before the end of the game. I know it because just like in Resident Evil 2, rooms turn blue when you've explored everything, so I know I found almost all the ones you can. This mechanic was very clearly intended to be used in New Game Plus as a way to encourage replayability. Now, I like the idea of New Game Plus and having new things in that mode to encourage replayability. But this means on your first playthrough, the passive buffs barely change the gameplay. At first, they're extremely gimmicky, like take less damage for every health item you're holding. And in the higher tiers, they become just blanket upgrades, like take less damage and do more damage, etc, etc. And I don't know. Leaving a mechanic for a second playthrough like this, assuming people will want to play the game again, just isn't a very smart idea. You should be trying to make the initial playthrough as good as possible so that people will want to come back again and again. But let's move on. As I was playing, I was thinking to myself, the only thing this game hasn't copied from a previous survival horror game is a stalker enemy. Those are pretty popular right now. I wonder if one's gonna show up. And to no one's surprise, once you get to the second main area of the game, boom, a stalker enemy shows up. This has to be the most phoned in stalker enemy I've ever been pursued by. Half of his mechanics genuinely don't work. He's supposed to be able to turn into a black blob and move ahead of you or block off areas, forcing you to either fight to destroy it, wait for the barrier to go away, or reroute your way around. But his AI is so broken, he only did this to me once. If you just ignore him and run past everything, he genuinely can't do anything. Even if he tries to get in the way, just dodge through him. Just such an overall nothing burger of an encounter. It's even funnier because they do this whole cutscene showing you how useless fighting back is and that you'll need to run away. Remember in Resident Evil 2 Remake when Tyrant lifted that helicopter and that's how his stalker section began? No big cinematic fanfare, just oh yeah, this dude's here now, good luck. That made it even more memorable. And again, we need to talk about the design. You're making a game set in a Lovecraft world, and the best you can come up with for a stalker enemy is this black goo monster? Even a generic fish monster would have been better. You'll also face off against some other notable enemies in boss arenas. There's 3 bosses in total. The first one is this big blob guy that shoots acidic spit at you. You'll have to dodge the bubbles he spits on the ground and the projectiles he shoots directly at you. And I hope you enjoy this fight because you fight him multiple times throughout the story, like at least 4 or 5 times. The second main boss is this big tentacle monster. This is the typical shoot the glowing weak point boss. You have to hit these 3 consoles to expose the weak points and then you can shoot them. Do this 3 times and the fight is over. Again, a pretty unremarkable encounter. The final boss is probably the best one, but that's not saying a whole lot. The design is alright, and a decent capstone to the campaign. My biggest problem with the boss encounters, or even some of the harder enemy encounters, are the constantly respawning loot that floods these fights. The arenas have these bright yellow item boxes that'll have resources you can use for the fight, but the problem is that even once they're looted, after a few seconds they'll spawn in even more items. I understand they don't want you to run out of resources during the fight, but this defeats the whole purpose of needing to sacrifice valuable resources in order to get past a tough encounter. You don't want people to get stuck, so definitely include some items in the arena, but don't restock them indefinitely. That's just a lazy way to manage the resource economy. The resource management in general is pretty scuffed. I played on hard and always had plenty of ammo and healing. The game has very lenient adaptive difficulty. If you're low on ammo or hurt, the next thing you search will have exactly what you need. There were so many scenarios where I was low on health and found a full heal in the next cupboard, even if I had 20 of them back in the safe room. If you're going to have limited inventory, players should probably be punished for not bringing enough ammo or healing. And this is probably the game's biggest misunderstanding of what makes survival horror so interesting. It copies the limited inventory, the safe rooms, the locked doors, and the inventory management, but then constantly protects you from the consequences of managing those things poorly. It has all the mechanics associated with survival horror without having enough confidence to let you actually struggle with survival. The final aspect of the gameplay we should talk about is the puzzles and investigations. Investigations are brought back from the first game, but they're much more straightforward. You pin clues on a board and then connect the dots between whichever ones sound similar to each other, or if they share a symbol, which they do on easier difficulties. You can choose a harder puzzle difficulty, but all it does is remove the symbols on clues and the highlights of important info from the lore notes. I'm sorry, but I'm not reading every lore note just in case something is important. I always hated when games do this. You need to make me care first before you ask me to read 1000 lore notes. The puzzles are also so simple most of the time you rarely even need to refer to the clues. There were like one or two that made me stop and think for a minute, but none of them were that memorable. Most of the level progress across the 5 areas follow a very similar linear track. It usually devolves into finding some MacGuffin key item that'll unlock a little bit more of the area. Keep exploring the new rooms until you've seen everything. There's definitely more backtracking here than in games of a similar genre. This isn't the worst thing, but it can sometimes feel like the devs are purposely trying to pad out the runtime. The hospital section especially dragged on a bit too long. Okay, time to move on to this game's story. And oh man, this game sure does have a narrative. As mediocre as the gameplay is, the story is even worse. The crux of the story is that you and your weirdo wife messed around with occult stuff, and during a ritual, you both get put into a dream state. Only you wake up, and now you have to find a way to wake your wife while the whole city sinks. The main character, Calvin, is a bit odd. The introduction flashback makes him out to be this collected and charismatic guy. There's a part where armed gunmen come after him, and he treats it as no big deal, as if he does this all the time.
You're lucky to walk out of this room alive after a stunt like that.
Sorry, baby. We've got visitors.
Trouble?
Oh, no. Probably after someone else.
Calvin Rafferty, freeze!
What are the odds? There's another Calvin Rafferty here.
Get going. I'll meet you at home. Love you.
Love you too.
It's like they were setting him up to be an Indiana Jones type character, but he never acts this way the rest of the game. He's actually usually the opposite. He's definitely brave since he fights monsters the whole story, but he constantly belittles himself, especially to his wife. I never got the vibe that he's some confident guy. The main story is also structured very poorly. After the first area, you're able to awake your wife's spirit, but not her body. This way, she's able to accompany you for the rest of the game, and you'll spend the rest of the game pursuing her body that's now been taken by some eldritch being for reasons unknown. We later find out she's something called a dreamer, which makes her special, which, is very convenient. The girl who's obsessed with occult stuff just so happens to be some special type of dreamer. But now the rest of the game is about going from key area to key area, solving puzzles, and then watching her body get taken away by the same monster over and over. After this happens twice, it starts to get very tedious. The story overall is a mess. It does very little to make you care about the characters. If anything, they come across as unlikable. It's hard to feel bad for the wife or Calvin when this is the direct result of them messing around with occult rituals beyond their understanding. I know they're supposed to be researchers or whatever, but what did they expect to happen? And I don't want to spoil the ending, even though I'd probably only recommend this on a very deep sale, but the ending makes them even more unlikable. The game is very short too. An entire playthrough will last you barely 6 hours. At $50, that's a pretty bad value proposition. There is a new game plus mode like I mentioned earlier, but I can't see myself wanting to replay this anytime soon. Also, there's a $13 story expansion being sold at the same time of release as the main game. Now, a 6-hour game being sold with a story DLC ready at launch, yeah, that's not a good look. Now, performance-wise, it ran fine on my computer. I played at 4K medium graphics settings and was consistently above 60 FPS. No FSR on release is kinda crazy though. And I did get the occasional UE5 stutter, but nothing game-breaking. Visually, the game looks okay for a AA project. It still has those shiny reflections you find in almost every UE5 game, but I can't hate too hard on a small budget project not looking like Uncharted. Overall, I've been very negative on the Sinking City 2, and it's not a god-awful game, but it's just so painfully mediocre across the board. Everything this game tries to do has been done better in other games. At least with the original, people may have forgiven the clunkiness if it meant we got to play something with a new idea, but this is just a cheaper version of a game everyone's already played. Anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say about the Sinking City 2. Let me know if you guys played it or the original. Were you disappointed by the genre change? Let me know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. My channel has dropped off pretty hard with the last few uploads. YouTube's not even attempting to give my videos a chance. I used to get tens of thousands of impressions, but now I only get a handful. There's nothing I can really do about this. I could make the best video on the planet, but if YouTube decides to not even test it, then that's that. So please do all the things the algorithm likes, and I'll catch you all in the next one. See ya.